Welcome to the Tech Savvy Professor podcast, which features two faculty members who love tech and love making it a part of their work. I'm Marty, a faculty member at Kent State University, and I guess I get to say this now because I remembered, program coordinator for the master's program. Believe me, that is not a prize you want to win, but I coordinate the master's counseling program here at Kent State University.
And I am Eric Perry. I am an associate faculty and a program director for Divine Mercy University's counseling program.
I have had a heck of a week. And I'll just start out with a little news and then we'll get into our topic. We're going to talk about VPNs and if you're looking for VPNs, why you would want to use them and such. But this weekend, I was getting ready because I had to do a KCREP site visit and I was chairing it. And there were like 4 other people on the committee. It was a huge institution. And I just was not feeling right at all on Sunday. And throughout Sunday, my Apple Watch kept telling me, you have a regular heartbeat. And I did what all good, mature adult people do when they get warnings about their health. Ignore it. Hope that it was something that was not meaningful. And it's just that I'm tired and I needed to take a good nap, but I got too much to do, et cetera, et cetera. Second mistake was I told my wife the next morning, just before the KCREP virtual visit was going to start. And she was upset and said, you call the nurse right now in your doctor's office. So I called the nurse thinking, I'm not going to get an appointment. I'm going to be tied up until 9 to 6 each day for the next couple of days. And I'm chairing this thing. I've got to be focused. I can't say, excuse me, I got to take off for a couple hours to go see the doctor. Well, I called the office and they said, well, we can get you in at 6 o'clock. So I went in Monday night at 6 o'clock. And the amazing part of it was, there were a couple of amazing parts. I finally looked at my watch, my watch was registering all the heart rate stuff. And this is karma because I told Aileen for years, I got to get the new watch. It's got all these health metrics on it that I could use, and I've got a heart issue and I've already had double beats and things like that. And well, sure enough, I shouldn't have been lying because the truth came, I did need it. But I went into the doctor. The doctor looked at my health app on my phone, and it was a full day of this thing registering every 2 to 3 minutes, dramatic changes in heart rate. So he looked at it and he said, yeah, AFib. And I was like, okay, what does that mean? He goes, well, I'm going to, first of all, this device, the thing that you're using, he goes, 98 to 99% effective in detecting this stuff. So, you get a few false positives out of 100, but generally it's right on target. And I was like, well, I never heard a doctor kind of endorse that way. And then he said, we still have to do some things. So they ran a strip on me. It was normal, of course. Monday I was fine. But then they hooked me up with a monitor. It's like a little button. And I've had loop recorders in my chest. Those are they're size of an inch long, maybe a third of an inch wide and thin. And they slip them in and they record. And then it got removed because it was done doing its business and the battery life ran out on it. So this thing, though, was, in the past, they used to strap you up with this whole harness thing that you'd have to wear for a week. This is basically a large bandage with a button on it. And I'm wearing that for the next couple of weeks to register my heart rate. And he said, I'll get a great report from it. Don't worry, great in the sense you'll get plenty of data. But I'm supposed to push the button anytime I feel a little dizzy or out of it or feel like I might have an episode. And I haven't had any for the last 3 or 4 days at all where I felt that way. However, I'm seriously thinking of charging people $0.25 just to push the button and sending a bunch of false positives in, have some fun with them. But, so that's my situation. But I have this device that I haven't paid much attention to, and it was really important in connecting with my health. I also have an Oura ring and I can't pronounce it, OURA, and it detected some of the heart fluctuations too that you could look at. It wasn't the data that came from the watch, but it did notate that I was probably under some level of stress because there is these fluctuations in my heart rate that it noticed. So that was my week. I don't know if you use any health devices or not, Eric.
I do. I have a Galaxy Watch.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of the Android version of the Apple Watch. But it did make me think of the new modern pacemakers that, my grandmother had surgery a few weeks ago, and she's still going strong, but had AFib, and, they kind of corrected it with this, and it's the size, essentially twice the size of a grain of rice.
Wow.
And they implant it in the heart, and it just tiny fluctuations and adjustments to keep her heartbeat steady. And they sent images and things of it. And one of the things I thought was really interesting, she came up with a question. She said, "Is this thing going to keep working even after I pass on?" Right? She's like, "Is it going to keep my heart rolling even though the rest of me's not moving?" And the doctor laughed and said that was actually a problem the first time we rolled these out. We didn't think about the need to cut them off, which is funny. You're talking about something that's as brilliant and technologically savvy as this, and they forgot about the off switch.
Yeah, your body's ready to die, but your little grain of rice in your heart won't let you.
And it'll keep things ticking even when there's no other function. So like they have to actually shut it off.
Wow.
That's pretty amazing. I think we think about some of these things, and I don't know, generationally, maybe we think about things half working sometimes.
Yeah.
And some of this technology, like you said, has come far enough that 98, 99% accuracy out of a watch you can buy as a consumer is pretty amazing.
Yeah. And the nurse who put this thing on me, I'll call her a nurse, a tech assistant or something like that. I hate to confuse things, but she used to work in a cardiologist's office, and she said the cardiologist she worked from, he believed everybody should be getting Apple Watches just for that purpose, particularly the people who are going through his office. And she goes, he loved them for that reason. So interesting. Now I've got continued excuses to buy the next model, which I think is supposed to do body temperature. I forget what the rumors are and what it's going to do in terms of temperature fluctuation, maybe, or blood pressure, but I don't know about that. They're working on that, and everybody's waiting for blood sugar would be the big, piece with a device like a watch. So let's get off of watches. Let's talk about VPNs. Any thoughts that you have in terms of using VPNs to start with?
Well, I think it would be helpful to talk about what they are, why they're useful.
Okay.
Because I think a lot of the time, maybe that's some of the issue. Like folks don't think about why they would need a VPN. So the whole objective for a VPN is to keep your information safe, to hide your IP address and your browsing, particularly when you're not on your home network. So when you're on public Wi-Fi or hotel Wi-Fi, things that are more susceptible to hacking, to trackers, things like that, it protects your data and what you're looking at. So when you think about it, without a VPN, your internet service provider, whoever that is, even at home, keeps a log of what you've been doing because they're loading the pages for you. They're essentially supplying the data, right? When you're out and about, the things that you do, you're making purchases, you're using safe passwords and things like that. Those things are susceptible to being hacked for folks to get access to that information. So a VPN helps protect it. There are several different types of VPNs that you can get for mobile devices or that have mobile versions and for PCs. So I've been testing out a couple and looking at ones to try and figure out what I like. I've had one for a while that I pay for, and I tried a free version of another not too long ago just because I was having some issues with speed and just thought it would be interesting to talk about here. And Marty, you travel a lot. I'm assuming a VPN is something you use pretty regularly.
Well, the problem is I've had it, I pay for it, and I forget to turn it on. And I realize I can turn it on so it's always on whenever I'm using my device. I've gotten a lot more serious about it lately. just because of the problems. I think hackers have gotten better at jumping onto public Wi-Fi. And that's where the public Wi-Fis, that would be things like hotels, airports, libraries. Those are possibilities where, people on that same Wi-Fi with ill intent could use ways to act to get into your information or phish or do some, get some information to kind of present some false opportunities to you that you might act on while you're browsing. And the big thing with VPNs is it makes you look like you're coming from another location than the location you're in. So that kind of tricks hackers into thinking, not knowing exactly where you are and what your IP address is, which is what gets you into can get them into your system in some way. So first things first, probably you want to make sure everything you're doing is two-factor authentication. That's always a safe bet. So, if you're doing anything on a public Wi-Fi and you're going to services like medical records, I wouldn't recommend doing that, or banking, on a public Wi-Fi. If you're using that, make sure you've got two-factor authentication, which will kind of add an extra layer of security with it. I like the idea of using them, and I've got some tips or some things that I've got pulled up, and I've got some websites for folks that are curious, and that'll be part of the notes. I think academics are traveling, and I know if I try to sign into my university account, it's going to require two-factor authentication, and it's going to make sure that through security measures that I am who I am, wherever I am. And, if you're out at a conference and you're there for 5 days, you really can't just walk away from, people do. I really can't just walk away from the job that I have, which means I have to go into my university system to do some work there. I'm probably been using more ExpressVPN. I can't tell you why I first chose that. I looked at a few others, and I might have even used Nord for a while, which I know that's one that you played with. And I've kind of settled on ExpressVPN. But I talk on a bunch of podcasts, and I talk to other tech folks, and about half of them are on Express, and the other half are on Surfshark. And so I'm looking at Surfshark only because some of the higher tiered things that it does, it will, go out and check the web for you and remove your data from personal information sites and things like that are out there. But there's an extra cost to it for that to happen. But I'd be curious to run that for a while and see what I get back in terms of where my personal data is out already in the internet, and it will clean those up for you. Some services like that will tell you it's there, and then you have to go figure out how to clean it up. So I'm particularly curious about the higher tiers of Surfshark. I like I said, I've used ExpressVPN and continue to use it. I have an account. I think it allows up to 8 different logons simultaneously if I was going to do that. My son will, when I said, hey, I can, you're going out to Vegas. If you want to use the ExpressVPN account, here's how you sign. He goes, oh no, Dad, I already got it. So, so I feel good about that in terms of him kind of surfing safely, because they will put him up in like one of those weekly stay hotels, and which he's like, when I was out there the last time, I had to take my phone out into the parking lot and hold it up in the air to get a cell signal. I think he's in a different location because what they're doing is in a different location in the area. So hopefully he's in a better place to live and with better Wi-Fi. But he's still looking at VPNs as being really important in terms of that. I can mention a few things about it and then let you kind of pick up where ideas from what I might have shared.
Sure. With
VPNs, you want to look at security and privacy. You want to look at strict no login policies and strong AES-256 encryption. So you want the stuff that's going through the VPN as being encrypted. You choose VPNs that support secure protocols like WireGuard or OpenVPN, and I'll show you a device that I'm going to play with later and maybe talk about it after a few trips that does that. And then, an essential feature is having a kill switch on it and DNS leak protection to prevent that from happening. You need a large number of servers. A large network is very helpful in terms of doing that across many countries, particularly if you are traveling across countries. I know the only time when I was in Turkey, the only time that I could get effective internet to get back to some of the material I wanted was to fake me being out of Turkey with a VPN.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could get access to the servers and log on to the sites that I wanted to get onto. Speed and performance, look for VPNs known for fast, stable connections, especially if you want to stream or game. It used to be, Eric, if you've done VPNs for a while, VPNs were kind of based on how much are they going to slow down your system, because it's an extra step. You're bouncing it out to another location, then bouncing it back. And I think that's really gotten much better, where it's not noticeable with VPNs anymore in terms of speed and performance. You want to make sure they have P2P file sharing and other types of important streaming services. Look for device compatibility between Windows, Mac OS, iOS, Android, and Linux, and check how many devices that you can have linked on simultaneously. Look for support if they have 24/7 support, pricing and value, and then trust and transparency. Prioritize services with strong reputations and independent security audits. So those are suggestions I found when looking for VPN. And I will put all of those, those things in the show notes too, so you can, listeners can, or viewers can see this in the video show notes and also on the podcast. Any of that strikes a bell with you?
So I wanted to comment on something you said a little earlier, which was the two-factor authentication part. And with physical files, we used to do that by locking it in a box and then locking the door. So you'd have two locks between the document and somebody getting to it. The same is true for digital files, right? Things like your passwords, your fingerprint, those can be locks. So you want at least two to be there. And thinking about VPNs, something else you said, they've gotten a lot faster. The drop is still similar. So it's a 10%, 15% drop in speed to bounce things. But things are so much faster now that you don't really feel the difference. A 10% drop in speed when you're going 1,000 miles an hour really isn't all that fast. But, if you're going 30 miles an hour and you drop to 27, it's just a big difference. You're not going to notice the difference between the speed quite as much. So those things make a lot of sense. I want to add the caution of be careful about open source with VPNs. So I decided to break my own rule and try Proton out. It seemed a couple of things in terms of reviews. It had popped up in the list on CNET for popular VPNs. So I just wanted to give it a shot. It was a free tier one that seemed to have some pretty good support. And it seemed like it functioned pretty well. It was easy enough to use, but I'll admit to being nervous the entire time. They do have paid tiers that you can use as a part of this. It's not just open source. It's not just free. So they do have paid subscription that adds some features to it. But I think for something that was open source and kind of considered safe, it functioned pretty well. I didn't notice a huge drop in speed, so it was something I would consider if I had to. But there's tons out there. You had mentioned Surfshark as being one that you could use. Somebody recommended CyberGhost. It's not one that I've looked at, but that they were using a lot more user-friendly if you're not as tech-savvy. So as a good kind of VPN starter. And I think they market themselves as being a little better on speeds and for use with gaming if you're doing that. So, there's a lot of options out there. My big cautions, even though I tried out Proton, would be to avoid kind of open source things, touted as free VPN services.
Yeah, and Proton VPN is always ranked very high in the different rankings. So I'm looking at one, and it's a site that we'll share in the show notes. This is Tom's Guide. So, Tom's Guide is pretty good, pretty reliable, and they basically have Nord as the top, well, the top three overview. NordVPN is the best for most people. Surfshark is the best cheap option. And unless you add this extra tier on where you want to see where your information is out in the internet, and then ExpressVPN is the best premium VPN, and then Proton comes in fourth. So it's kind of consistently ranked well, but there are ones like Proton or not as good characters as Proton that are free. And you got to wonder, how do they keep in business unless they're not using your data? Maybe they're flooding you with ads. There are things that get in the way of them just giving away the service. So you pay, it's best for you to invest money into a service that has been audited, has been checked, and, is a safe service for you to use. And that sometimes means spending money. I don't know if there's anything else on this. We'll have lots of these resources available for you on site. There's a couple of CNET articles that cover everything you need to know about VPNs and how they work. So if this just seems really different for you, or what is a VPN, this article will give you some of the basic breakdowns of what you need and how they work and what it does and how much do they cost in terms of different plans. Then
to mention my favorite feature.
What is that?
So if you're traveling out of country and you want to watch Netflix,
yeah,
select a server for the US, connect that way, and you'll be allowed to log in. If you are on Wi-Fi, I visit Canada to fish a couple of times a year, you're not going to be able to log in, trying to access from a different country. But with a VPN, you are technically accessing from a server in the US and could then use your normal login procedure, and it would be just like watching it at home.
Yeah, the thing I run into is occasionally my VPN goes to Chicago. I can choose, I'm in Ohio, I can choose New York, Chicago. I guess I could choose anywhere. But when it goes to Chicago and then I attempt to watch MLB, to watch the Cubs, it has me placed in Chicago, which the game is blacked out in Chicago, so I can't get it on MLB. So I have to be careful about that. When you mentioned Netflix, I was thinking about that in Turkey. It was a site I couldn't get from Turkey until I got on a VPN. A couple of more pages I want to share. This is a CNET article on best VPN services of 2025. And you have to be careful. I mean, CNET is a kind of open, I'm sure they receive some advertisement from these folks, but it's amazing when you look at some of these best of, you find out that they're really just kind of shell sites for convincing you this is the best VPN because the shell site was put up by that VPN. So, but it gives you some ideas about choices, what they look like, how they run. So that's also a good article. And I mentioned the Tom's Guide article, which also has some extensive explanation of each one of their top-rated ones. On the side, I want to mention iCloud Private Relay. This is a system that's set up with current iCloud Plus subscriptions. So for folks who are Apple-centric, if you have an iCloud Plus subscription, that's generally a subscription where you're buying cloud space to store stuff. It helps your privacy when you browse the web using Safari. And what it does is it kind of fakes out people in terms of what your IP address is. So it generates a false IP address. You can also do things like making sure that your DNS records are protected through the system. It's a pretty cool, it's not a full VPN, but it's a pretty cool system that Apple has put together for its operating system on devices and on its browser. So it's built into specifically the Safari browser. And then this last thing, which is a toy that I wanted to get because I often want to do shows or do some streaming from hotels, and hotel Wi-Fi is notoriously bad for that process. And I've dropped out of shows and such. I will sometimes do a hotspot and connect my phone to a device in order my computer in order to do the streaming that way, and the 5G network works pretty well for that. Zoom, for example, has a minimum of, I think, 3 megabytes per second. But it's more functional around 10 or 15 megabytes per second in terms of streaming in order to do that. But sometimes Wi-Fi in hotels and public Wi-Fi, even on a VPN, is not very good at doing that. So the other alternative is I've always stared at these little holes going, who in the world still uses an Ethernet in a hotel? And some of my colleagues thought, well, this is the device that you can do that with. And so I haven't field tested it yet, but I will. And when I do, I'll mention it on one of the shows that's coming up, how this works. It's about the size of a pack of cigarettes. And it has Wi-Fi antennas on it, Wi-Fi 6, although we don't have devices that run Wi-Fi 6 yet. We do, but they're very rare. But that's sort of the next step. And you can see from the front of it, it has the Ethernet plug-in. So you can plug into that little thing that's stuck in your desk that's supposedly an Ethernet connector and plug it into this, and you set up your own little virtual private Wi-Fi system if you want to do that. So I think I can get faster speed by hooking into the hotel than I would get just trying to use their Wi-Fi and connecting that way. But time will tell. I'm going on a couple of trips in the next couple of weeks, and I'll try it in a couple of hotels to see what happens with it. So that's what I've got in terms of websites and toys, and we'll let you know more about that when it plays out.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear about how it works. Something I've never tried.
Yeah, well, yeah, I could have, it could be I laugh, I cry, I kiss $86 goodbye with it. So we'll see how it works. But I think that's a wrap for this show. And I'm glad we could get this off in the second week. And we'll continue to try and set aside time on Thursdays, at 2 p.m. Eastern time. And we'll start to promo that through my different social media networks, kind of announce that the show is live or going to go live, and hopefully capture some folks who are going to join us live for the purpose of it. Look for us on Spotify, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, and all the other podcast servers. I want to mention one thing that I'm going to be involved in. And Eric, I wish you had a little twinge of Apple joy in your life, because it would be fun to have you at MacStock. And you would go, I can do this. MacStock is a conference that comes up every year. In this case, and it's in July 11th, 12th, and 13th. And it's MacStockConferenceandExpo.com. And it is 3 days of presentations. They're 45-minute presentations. So if something doesn't thrill you, just wait 45 minutes or go out and get a cup of coffee, and there'll be another one coming up. But they're great presentations, and they're all recorded and kept for people to look at afterwards, attendees, and also those who have purchased the virtual ticket. And it's in Woodstock, Illinois, really Crystal Lake. But MacStockConferenceandExpo.com is the website. And as you page down on the main page, you'll see some of the speakers that they'll be having coming in, myself included, and also my son. Will is coming with me on this trip, and we're going to do a presentation called Gear Up and Go, which is basically travel apps and travel technology that we take and use on the road. And I've got some ideas for that, so it's not just me showing up and throwing up. We're going to do some audience participation stuff and have some door prizes, but he and I will be driving over. Eric, you could have driven over here, dropped your car off here, gotten in the car with us, and drove over to Chicago, Northern Illinois. We're picking up Gary, an 87-year-old guy who's part of the Old Mac Gang podcast, and he's going there for the first time. But it's just a great group of folks. About 100 people show up at the conference, and so you're able to meet people and spend time and network with them. It's MacStockConferenceandExpo.com, July 11th, 12th, and 13th. And if you put in as a discount ticket Pod Talk 50, you'll get $50 off the registration for MacStock. So you get a little bit of deal just by knowing Pod Talk 50. So that's MacStock, and I'm excited. I'm going to be talking about Apple Intelligence, or what's left of it, with all the trouble that it's had recently, and Will and I will be doing the thing about tech and travel. Anyway, that's about all I've got to share, and you can find us on most podcast servers. Like I said, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple Podcasts, and all podcast servers. Do you have anything left, Eric, you want to mention?
No, next week will be a little hiatus. I'm going to be in the marshes with my son at the NASA Flight Center in Virginia. But aside from that, I'm excited for us to get on the weekly turn here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll see. We'll see in 2 weeks. I mean, we'll see everybody in 2 weeks, and that'll be great. So everything you need to know about us is at thepodtalk.net. Look for our other shows like Circular Firing Squad, and then Vision Profiles, and Old Mac Gang, and Gear Up and Go. You can find all about those shows at thepodtalk.net. That's it for this episode. Thanks for subscribing to the Tech Savvy Professor.